First story, the macabre gym ritual. Marcus, Talia, and Billy decided to gather in the school gym after classes to perform a summoning game. The idea had started as a joke during lunch, but curiosity and the search for adrenaline led them to actually try it. With the gym doors closed and the lights off, the only illumination came from a candle they placed in the center of the circle they drew with chalk on the floor. The legend about the ritual had circulated among the third-year students for years. It was said that a girl and her friend had performed the same ritual in the gym and were never seen again. There were missing posters with their photos spread throughout the school ever since, but no one knew exactly what had happened. This only increased the fascination and fear surrounding the ritual. At first, everyone was nervous. Talia's eyes seemed even larger in the candlelight, and Billy kept laughing nervously, trying to ease the tension. Marcus, who prided himself on being the bravest of the group, led the reading of the words they found on an obscure website. After a few minutes of recitation, silence fell over them. They waited anxiously, but nothing happened. Billy let out a sigh of relief and laughed, breaking the tension. "I guess we're safe, guys. It's just a silly game." Everyone laughed and started talking about how scared they had been for no reason. They decided it was time to leave, but when they tried to open the gym doors, they realized they were locked. "This isn't funny," Talia said, trying to force the door open. Suddenly, a red liquid began to trickle down the gym walls. "Is that blood?" Billy stammered, staring in horror at what was unfolding before his eyes. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The situation worsened when a dense, almost palpable darkness began to envelop the gym. The walls, the floor, and even the ceiling seemed to disappear into the darkness, and the candle that was the only source of light was extinguished by a cold gust of wind. Panic set in. A piercing scream echoed through the gym as Talia was the first to be swallowed by the darkness. "Talia!" Marcus shouted, trying to find her, but his eyes couldn't penetrate the darkness. Billy also screamed, and soon after, absolute silence took over the environment. Marcus was alone. He felt despair take hold of his body, but knew he needed to keep moving. With his arms extended in front of him, he tried to find a way out, but each step seemed to lead to more darkness. He heard footsteps behind him and turned, calling out his friends' names. "Billy? Talia?" But the only response was the echo of his own voice. Then, he saw a shadow moving quickly out of the corner of his eye. He ran in the opposite direction, but his feet stumbled over something invisible on the floor. Marcus's heart pounded uncontrollably. He knew he needed to get out of there, but the darkness was relentless. Suddenly, he felt something grab his arm. He struggled to break free, but the grip was immense. He fell to the ground, feeling the cold surface against his skin. Marcus got up again, his muscles aching and his breath heavy. He knew he was losing the battle against the darkness, but he couldn't give up. Each step he took seemed more difficult than the last. He stumbled again and fell, this time feeling something warm and sticky under his hands. It was blood. His friend's blood, perhaps. He didn't know. He only knew he needed to keep fighting. He got up one last time and ran with all his might, screaming for help. But his screams were muffled by the darkness that finally enveloped him completely. The next day, the school hallways were eerily silent. Students and teachers noticed a change in the atmosphere, but no one could pinpoint exactly what it was. In the main corridor near the gym, the missing posters of the two third-year girls now shared space with new posters. The new additions were photos of Marcus, Talia, and Billy, with the same words of anguish and uncertainty. Beneath the photos, the familiar faces now joined those who had disappeared years ago. The legend of the gym ritual had claimed new victims, and the school, haunted by silence, awaited the next deadly game that student curiosity would bring. The corridors echoed with the whisper of terror, and the gym remained locked, hiding the dark secrets of the invocations that should never have been performed. If this story is keeping you on the edge, leave a like to let me know you want more. Your support inspires me to create even darker tales. And to ensure you don't miss any new spine-chilling stories, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Second story, a terrifying chemical disaster. It all started when the chemistry teacher was giving a lesson about the events of Chernobyl, which caught the interest of Daniel, a young nerd and curious student. After hearing all the bizarre effects of radiation, he decided to go to the library to learn more. He found a history book that detailed various radioactive tragedies and showed photos of completely deformed people. It also contained extensive information about how radioactive products were made. Feeling a huge curiosity to test those experiments, Daniel waited for lunchtime when all the teachers would be absent and the students would be in the cafeteria. Seizing the moment, he broke into the chemistry lab. Reading the book he found in the library, he began mixing reagents in an attempt to cause small radioactive reactions. Finally, he managed to obtain a fluorescent liquid and decided to test it on a frog used for dissection classes. The frog began to convulse, and Daniel was fascinated by the scene. In the book, he read about a reagent marked with a skull symbol, which was a radiation enhancer. However, he did not know where to find it. The next day, Daniel talked to one of the school gang members, who was accompanied by his two henchmen. These guys would do anything for money. Daniel spoke about the reagent he needed, and they said they had seen it in the back of the chemistry lab, but that area was locked, and no one had access to it. The only way to get the product was by breaking into the school at night. They charged $50 for the invasion service. Finding it extortionate but still curious about his experiments, Daniel paid the gang leader. Later that day, they entered through the back window of the locked area. Daniel went with them because he couldn't contain his excitement and wanted to see the result of his experiment. The gang leader Carl and his two helpers broke the chemistry lab window, and with each other's help, they all entered the dark room. They immediately smelled the strong odor of chemicals. After searching, they found a container with the symbol Daniel had seen in the book. Carl confirmed it was the right one and said their job was done. He prepared to leave, but the two friends in the back called out, saying there were dangerous products they could use to make explosives. While the gang members searched the room, Daniel focused on his experiment. He quickly pulled out the initial mixture he had previously made and the altered frog from a plastic bag. The frog was already raw but could still be used. Lighting his cell phone flashlight to see better in the dark, he began adding the reagent to the initial mixture. The liquid glowed intensely in the dark. He poured the mixture onto the frog, which started convulsing even though it was dead. Eyes appeared, bubbles formed, and a small limb emerged. Fascinated, Daniel thought, if a small drop of this caused all this mutation, imagine a larger dose. He then added a large dose to his glass vial with the radioactive mixture. The reaction's temperature rose drastically, and the color became so intense and hot that the glass vial exploded in front of Daniel. Shards of glass flew towards him, and a good portion of the dose fell on him. Daniel screamed and writhed on the floor, clutching his face. Alarmed, the gang members ran to see what had happened. Carl, trying to understand what was going on, moved Daniel's hands from his face and saw that he was covered in blood, with several eyes on his face, completely deformed and melting. Terrified, the boys tried to run but stumbled over the glass shards scattered on the floor after the explosion, which had knocked over several shelves with beakers and glass vials. Daniel began to take on a grotesque form, growing several horrible limbs. He advanced towards the fallen gang members, screaming "Help me" in a grotesque and unintelligible voice. The creature that had taken over Daniel used its dozens of limbs to grab the boys. The grotesque, twisted limbs extended in all directions, with sharp claws that firmly closed around the boys' necks. Carl and his helpers tried to fight back, but the creature's strength was immense. They were paralyzed with fear, their eyes wide with horror as they looked at Daniel's deformed face, now almost unrecognizable. "Help me," the creature gurgled in a distorted and terrifying voice, each word coming out as a horrible lament. The pressure increased around their necks, and panic turned into desperation as they felt the air disappear from their lungs. The monstrous fingers squeezed tighter and tighter until the boys' screams turned into choking gurgles. The light of life in their eyes began to fade as they struggled in vain to break free. The dark room was filled with the anguished sound of the boys' last breaths. Finally, the lethal strength of the creature prevailed, and the gang members' bodies fell still, their faces contorted in a final expression of agony and terror. The creature, now completely deformed, with multiple eyes and twisted limbs, retreated to a dark corner of the room. Its grotesque body trembled and writhed, each movement revealing more deformities. The darkness enveloped it, but its screams continued, echoing off the walls of the chemistry lab. "Help me," it repeated, its voice laden with indescribable pain, growing louder and more desperate. The creature was trapped in that nightmare of deformed flesh and bones, longing for a release that seemed impossible. Its torment was palpable, a constant presence in the room saturated with chemicals and blood. As the night wore on, the creature remained there, growing more grotesque by the minute, its agonizing screams filling the oppressive silence. It was trapped for now, but as soon as the daylight brought someone to investigate, the room would become the scene of a new tragedy. And so, in the dark, the creature waited, yearning for the end of its own agony or the chance to bring new horror to anyone unlucky enough to cross its path. Third story, The Demonic Blackboard. During a free period, a group of young students decided to explore the abandoned back areas of the school. The teacher hadn't shown up, and the students' curiosity led them to a rarely frequented corridor where old, dusty doors held secrets from the school's past. With muffled laughs and excited whispers, they ventured down an unused hallway, pushing open a slightly ajar door that revealed an old, dark room. The smell of mold and the sight of old furniture covered in white sheets created an atmosphere of mystery and adventure. At the back of the room, a strange blackboard caught their attention. It was different from the others, with ornate borders and faded inscriptions that were barely visible. Below it, a piece of chalk, yellowed with age, lay alone. "Check this out," said Josh, picking up the chalk. "I bet no one has used this in years." The students, finding it all quite amusing, decided to start drawing on the board. At first, they drew innocent things like flowers and hearts, but soon Josh's darker creativity took over. He began sketching grotesque and demonic figures, laughing as he did so. "Dude, this is getting creepy," commented Lucas, somewhat nervous but not wanting to show fear. Suddenly, something strange happened. The lines of the drawings began to move. The students' eyes widened in disbelief as the drawings came to life, writhing and emerging from the blackboard. The room, which had been filled with laughter, now fell into terrifying silence. Before they could react, the drawings materialized into monstrous forms. The demons' eyes glowed with a malevolent fire, and their twisted bodies crawled across the room. Josh was the first to be attacked. One of the demons grabbed him with sharp claws and pulled him into the blackboard. His screams echoed through the room, increasing the panic among his friends. "Help!" screamed Emily, trying to back away from the creatures. But the demons were quick and relentless. The students desperately tried to find an escape, but the door was locked, and the windows had become impenetrable barriers. Emily tried to hide behind a desk, but a demon found her, her screams piercing the air before she was dragged into the darkness. Lucas, in a desperate act, picked up a chair and tried to fight, but it was useless. A demon smashed him against the wall, leaving his body limp and lifeless. The demons, satisfied with their initial victims, didn't stop there. They spread throughout the school, passing through doors and walls as if they were made of air. The hallways filled with screams and chaos. Students ran in all directions, trying to escape the horror that pursued them. The lights flickered, and the atmosphere became filled with the smell of sulfur and despair. The school, which had been a place of learning and friendship, transformed into a hunting ground. Every classroom, every corridor, became a scene of terror. The demons, with their grotesque forms, found and destroyed everything in their path. Teachers tried to protect the students, but they were quickly overpowered by the supernatural strength of the creatures. Amid the chaos, the school's principal, Mrs. Green, tried to call the police, but the phones were dead. In a final effort, she attempted to organize an evacuation, but it was in vain. The demons were everywhere, and there was nowhere to run. As the hours passed, the entire school was engulfed in an atmosphere of indescribable horror. The students' screams became less frequent until they ceased entirely. The building, now silent, was shrouded in an aura of death and desolation. The demons, having completed their mission of destruction, returned to the blackboard, disappearing into its depths. The blackboard, now smeared with blood and ash, stood as a silent testament to the massacre. The next day, the school was deserted. The few who dared to approach found a scene of absolute terror. The walls were stained with blood, and the silence was oppressive. At the back of the room, the blackboard remained, untouched but with a dark presence that seemed to watch over everything. No one ever discovered what really happened that fateful afternoon. The school was closed and abandoned, and stories of hauntings and demonic apparitions spread throughout the town. The blackboard and its cursed chalk remained there, waiting for those foolish enough to try to uncover its dark secrets.